MA thesis defense. First of all, thank you everybody for coming. It is kind of a drag that we're doing this on screens, but I think it's a lot more fun for Sofia to have a community of friends and colleagues and current professors and former professors and family, of course. So thank you to all of you for being here with us this morning. Just so you know, we are recording this session. Nobody is going to really have access to the recording except Sofia, but she wanted to have access to it, so we're recording the session. So I hope that's okay with everybody. So my name is Stephen Prince. I'm an associate professor of history at USF based on the Tampa campus. I was lucky enough to be Sofia's major professor and the director of this MA thesis. And I also have the honor of sort of, emceeing the defense today. The other committee members who are here with us are Dr. Jody McBrien, who is a professor in the the School of Interdisciplinary Global Studies. Close enough. SIGS, the School of Interdisciplinary and Global Studies. I know what it's called. On the Sarasota Manatee campus, and Dr. Julia Irwin, who is an associate professor of history on the Tampa campus. So the way this is going to work is that after I finish speaking, we will turn it over to Sofia, who will present for 10 or 15 minutes. She has a PowerPoint that will sort of, walk you through the thesis for those of you who haven't had the benefit of reading it ahead of time. Then we will go to the committee and we will take turns asking questions. And I'm going to give Dr. McBrien the first question, and then Dr. Irwin will ask a question, and then I will ask a question, and then we will go around and around like that for several hours until we get tired. It shouldn't take that long. Then we will open it up to questions from the audience if there are any questions. At that point, the committee will leave. We will go to a separate Teams meeting where we will make our decision and our recommendation. You all can stay and talk, and then we will all come back and deliver the verdict and celebrate. So with that, if there are not any other questions, I will turn it over to Sofia. I would ask that everybody make sure that you mute your microphones if you are not Sofia, and we can go ahead and get started.
Okay, just give me 1 second to start sharing my screen so I can get my timer as well. Okay. So, Dr. Prince, can you just turn on your mic and let me know that you can see the screen?
All good, yep.
Okay, because I can't see anybody. I can only see the PowerPoint right now. Let me get my timer and then we'll start. Okay, so hello everyone, my name is Sofia Paschero and my thesis is called The Dream Act and Daca, A History of Immigrant Children. So there's a lot of history written on immigration, but these are my two conversants. This is historian Erica Lee. In her book, America for Americans, A History of Xenophobia in the United States, she argues that throughout centuries, US citizens labeled immigrants as threats because they viewed them as poor, criminals, brought disease, had dangerous political ideals, took Americans' jobs, would not assimilate, and they would impose their culture on Americans. And for these reasons, the United States passed many discriminatory immigration laws. Historian Lee does not focus on immigrant children or gives the immigrant experience in her book. Dr. Michael Olivias, in his book, Perchance to Dream, Illegal and Political History of the Dream Act and Daca, argued that the first obstacle an undocumented immigrant faces is attending higher education. I agree that it is an obstacle, but it's not the first obstacle. In his book, he does not give that DACA individual perspective. He examines more of the immigration laws on higher education in all 50 states. So my research shows the history of immigrant children. Many historians that study immigration history focus on male immigrants or the family, and they don't focus so much on immigrant children, but I do with my research. I give in-depth information on immigration laws and court cases in the 20th century and how it affected immigrant children living in the United States at the time. And this becomes the foundation for the 21st century and the introduction to the DREAM Act. I fully examined the congressional records and senator speeches from the year 2001 to 2020. Interviews show the human aspect of what it's like to be a child immigrating, being undocumented in the US and receiving Daca. My participants for most of their lives lived in the state of Florida, so I just focus on the state of Florida. This is also an autoethnography. Many historians do not talk about their own personal experiences when writing history, and I felt that it was important to talk about my own experience and make connection with my participants' experiences. So I fully examined the congressional records, like I said, from the years 2000 to 2001 to 2010 on the DREAM Act. I also examined senator speeches that were made on the Senate floor and in the media. I incorporated newspaper articles. I interviewed 3 individuals who immigrated to the US as children, were undocumented, and then received DACA. And like I said earlier, my research is in autoethnography. So my main argument is politicians create immigrants as scapegoats in order to avoid the social, political, cultural, and economic issues that are affecting people on both sides of the border. They divert attention from not dealing with the real problems. You know, I argue that there's this political usage of immigrant children throughout the DREAM Act and DACA, from senators that are in favor and those that are opposed of it. I argue that there's 3 obstacles undocumented immigrants face. First is getting a driver's license. Second is obtaining a job. And third is attending higher education. This is how my thesis is laid out. These are my 3 chapters. So in chapter 1, in the late 20th century, I examined how immigration laws and court cases targeted immigrant children living in the US. And these are a couple court cases and laws at the time. So Toll versus Moreno deals with the higher education for immigrants in the state of Maryland. The Supreme Court stated that the University of Maryland had no reason to deny in-state tuition if the proper proof of residency could be shown. However, every state has their own laws regarding in-state tuition for undocumented immigrants. Plyler versus Doe in 1975, the Texas legislature enacted laws that granted local school districts the authority to deny enrollment to undocumented children. Undocumented children were forced to pay tuition to attend public schools. And in 1982, the Supreme Court ruled that undocumented children have the right to receive the same education as any US citizen. Proposition 187 denied undocumented immigrants essential health, public education, and emergency medical services, but this was blocked by a federal judge because it was considered unconstitutional. The Galilei Amendment would not allow states to decide if they wish to pay for the education of undocumented immigrant children. Half of the Senate opposed to this amendment because it would allow states to deny public education to children who were brought to the US illegally, and this amendment failed. So in chapter 2, I talk about the history of the DREAM Act and DACA. In 2001, Republican Senator Orrin Hatch and Democrat Senator Richard Durbin announced the Development and Relief and Education for Alien Minors, known as the DREAM Act. This act is supposed to provide a path to citizenship for children that were brought to the US, as immigrant children. However, the act sat in Congress for 6 years until 2007. So in 2007, the DREAM Act went for this 20-minute debate on the Senate floor. And in this debate, we hear those who are in favor and those who are opposed to the DREAM Act. And we see this political usage of immigrant children in the debate. With those opposed, we hear historian Erica Lee's argument on immigrants being a threat to the US. And with those in favor, they argue that immigrants will help the US. These immigrant children will join the military, they will continue their education and help the economy. It's more of if we give them a path to citizenship, this is how they're going to help our country. It's what these immigrant children can do for the United States. So the DREAM Act failed in 2007, and it failed again in 2010. And in 2012, on the 40th anniversary of Plyler versus Doe, President Barack Obama announced the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, known as DACA. And DACA was granted for those individuals that were brought to the United States as children, and it was a way for them to become members of society, but it did not give them a path to citizenship. So DACA was supposed to be temporary until a better solution, like the DREAM Act, could be passed in Congress. However, on September 5th of 2017, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced the rescinding of the DACA program. And in his speech, we can hear the same rhetoric that Erica Lee points out, that, immigrants, they're taking our jobs. Our nation is at a risk of crime and violence and terrorism. Chapter 3 is the history of the immigrant children. I interviewed 3 individuals that immigrated to the United States in 2001. And as you can see by the table, this is everybody's age when they immigrated. Everybody shared their life experiences, favorite and sad memories from their country of origin, immigrating experience, assimilating, living as undocumented immigrants, and having DACA. And one of the most important questions that I asked everybody was if they made the decision to immigrate, and everybody responded no. Their parents made that decision. And I want to share a little bit about Carl's experience, and he gives a very well detailed explanation of why his parents immigrated, and it ties in with his sad memory. In Argentina, Carl's older brother started a bakery business and took a loan from the bank. Carl's father signed on the loan, and the business failed. In Argentina, the bank will send people to find whoever signed the loan and collect from them. They will go into their homes and take things in order to pay off the loan. Carl's father moved everything from the living room into a storage, and the living room was completely empty from 1999 until 2000. Shortly after, Carl's dad had a heart attack, and he was the main provider in the family. So they had 8 children. 4 of them were grown up, had their own families. 4 were minors, the 3 were teenagers, and the child was Carl, the youngest. Carl's mother didn't work. She took care of the children. And once Carl's father was able to recover, he tried to go back to work, but they told him that they didn't want him. He was 50 years old and he was considered too old, and he had a heart attack and he had that disability. So as a parent, you have to ask yourself, what do you do? And his parents decided to come to the US, where they had the opportunity to provide for their children. I asked everyone as children, did they understand the reason for immigrating? Alejandro and I responded, we didn't know what was going on. Alejandro thought he was going to Disney World. Nick understood because he was a little bit older, and he understood that he and his family were less fortunate than others. Carl understood as well from hearing adults speak, but he said the whole process was very quick. And when he was telling his friends, he wasn't sure. He's like, I think I'm leaving Argentina, not being sure about it. So these are the 3 main obstacles undocumented immigrants faced. First is obtaining a license, because in the state of Florida, people can get a permit at the age of 15 and then get a driver's license. So undocumented immigrants cannot do that because they need a social security number when applying to get a license. As teenagers, they grow up and they see their classmates being able to drive, and they miss out on that experience. Second is getting a job, because in high school, these individuals are trying to get after school jobs, and they can't get these certain jobs because they need that social security number. And last is attending higher education, because once these immigrants want to graduate high school, they want to attend higher education, and these certain states have their own laws regarding tuition fees for undocumented immigrants. And in the state of Florida, the in-state tuition waiver was introduced in 2014. So before that, undocumented immigrants and DACA recipients had to pay out-of-state tuition fees. So in the 20th century, there's no immigration reforms in the United States that helped immigrant children become permanent residents or US citizens. So from 2001 to 2020, many senators have worked hard to try to pass this comprehensive immigration reform to help immigrant children. However, they've been unsuccessful because there's many senators trying to block that immigration reform. Throughout the 21st century, there's the political usage of immigrant children and the political debate of the DREAM Act and DACA. In Chapter 2, senators that are in favor of the DREAM Act argue that immigrant children are brought to the United States in no volition of their own. Many came to the US at a young age, no longer speak that first language, and do not remember much of their home countries. This is one of the many reasons senators that are in favor of the DREAM Act say it should be passed, so that these immigrants can have a chance to become members of the United States. These immigrants will join the military or continue the education, and they will contribute to this country. Senators who are opposed to the DREAM Act argue that passing this immigration reform will be rewarding illegal immigration. Again, in Chapter 3, all 4 participants did not consider coming to the United States as illegal. When asked why did they immigrate, all 4 participants stated their parents made that decision to immigrate because they wanted to provide for their families and did not have the options to do this in the country that they were living in. I argue that obtaining a driver's license is first, getting a job is second, and attending higher education is third. These are the 3 obstacles, and it's not something that can be achieved because there's laws in each state that have their own criteria on immigrants applying for all 3. As mentioned in Chapter 1, there's no unified system, especially when it comes to applying to higher education. Certain states have their own laws regarding in-state tuition fees for undocumented immigrants and Daca recipients. I can hear the applause in my mind.
Yes. Thank you. You just manufactured applause. That was cleverly done. Good for you. All right. So, Dr. McBrien, if you want to take the first question, and then we will sort of just go around for a few rounds, and we'll see how it goes.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Prince. It's really been a pleasure, Sophia, just to watch your growth over the past 4 years as a scholar and someone who's really done some very hard work in your research here. So there are no right answers to these questions. And one of the things that you pointed out in your paper, sorry, I'm looking at a different screen at my question. That's why I'm not looking away from you. You point out that states, or you stated that laws give rise to stereotypical beliefs and attitude toward immigrants. I think you could also contend the opposite, that the stereotypical beliefs give rise to the laws. So I'm just curious, you chose though to say that the laws do that. So can you defend that position?
Sure. Well, I think it's obviously many senators are coming together and they're talking amongst one another about what type of laws should be passed in the United States. And it's also who they feel should come into the country, who should stay and who shouldn't. So that's why I worded it that way. But I can see what you mean as well. It can be reversed. But that's how I viewed it. I felt that senators can talk amongst themselves and say, well, this is how we feel that we want certain individuals in the United States and who we want and who we don't want. And I think it's laws that restrict people from doing certain things or entering the country.
Thanks.
Should I go?
Yes.
No, actually, I mean, I guess my first question was actually a sort of related question too, and maybe can sort of push you to talk a little bit more about it. You referenced Lopez at the end of Chapter 1 with the quote, "Law constructs race," but I was hoping you could talk sort of more about that, sort of specifically focusing back on the history, like thinking back to the immigration laws of 1952 and 65 and moving forward. Can you talk a little bit more sort of specifically about how sort of ideas about race and ethnicity have shaped immigration law over that time? Because I think you made some good points there in the dissertation.
Sure. So in the beginning of my first chapter, I briefly touch about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and then the trying to end that origin of like those individuals, more individuals coming to the United States. But then we see in like 1924 to 1952 of Mexicans being targeted and laws targeting Mexican immigrants. And then we see in 1952 this establishing of allowing certain individuals or certain immigrants come to the United States and trying to get rid of those quota systems. But it's still not very successful. And according to Erica Lee, she's like, no, there's still xenophobia within the United States. There's still these racist views against immigrants. But I felt that it was necessary to talk about those immigration laws in the very beginning of my thesis, because I think that kind of sets the tone for 1975 leading up to 2000, because those laws don't really target immigrant children. It's 1975 until 2000 that those particular laws and court cases target the children. But I felt that it was necessary to talk a little bit about what is happening within the country of laws targeting all immigrants.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sophia.
Hi, Sophia. I wanted to push you on historiography a little bit, because you mentioned Erica Lee, obviously, as well as Olivas. But I also know that, in your time in the graduate program, you've read a lot more widely than that. You've done a lot of reading in immigration history, some with me, some with other faculty members. So could you speak a little bit about, other works besides Lee and Perchance the Dream that were particularly significant for you, even if they were just sort of as models or inspiration?
Sure. So a couple books that are coming into my mind that are models and inspiration is like Ronald Takaki's The Making of Asian Americans, and those immigrants coming to the United States. He does an excellent job, and one of the things that I really enjoyed about his book is that he actually throws in his family's history in there, and he does it so eloquently. So he doesn't do like a chapter 3 on its own like I do and just talk about these oral history, but he like throws in his family's history in there. Another book that's coming to my mind right now that I felt is not so much on immigration, but it kind of did serve as a model for me was Monica Muniz Martinez, The Injustice Never Leaves You, because she does a bit of oral history in her book. She interviewed her uncle, and she actually incorporates her uncle's experience inside her book. And she also went into the archives at Texas A&M and did a little bit of digging of oral histories in those archives. And I can remember this from the conclusion that it made me so mad. One of the people working at Texas A&M told her, well, those interviews, don't consider them like, being, correct, because there's no names of attached to those people speaking. There's no pseudonyms, or they didn't state their actual names. And I was like, no, there can be so many reasons why people don't say their names. For example, like my research, I don't use their real names. I use pseudonyms because, considering our last administration not being pro Daca, I wanted to do that. I didn't feel it was right to put their names out there. It was fine for me to do that, but not with theirs. So those are a couple of models that are coming to my mind.
Okay. You talk a lot about, and we've talked about this quite a bit, the difficulty of gaining higher education. And it's still incredible to me that someone who has DACA status would still have to pay out-of-state tuition. But can you clarify, in the United States, there is not a right to education, but once a state says that there will be public education, then the 14th Amendment applies. And you were talking a little bit about higher ed and the application of the 14th Amendment, and I'm just in the Maryland case. So I was just a little confused. Maybe you can just clarify it a little bit for me. If the state allows, I think I'm going to give it to you because I'm not clear on it. I just was trying to understand how the state would differentiate between in-state tuition and out-of-state tuition in public institutions.
Okay, yeah. So in the state of Maryland, with the Toll versus Moreno case, like as many of you know, with international students, they are considered like F1 or J1, but in that particular case, they're considered J4. I never heard of that before, but the University of Maryland wanted those students to pay out-of-state tuition fees. But they were arguing, if I can prove residency, that I've lived here, why can't I pay in-state tuition? And that's why I went to the Supreme Court. But like I said, it's very, very picky with all 50 states regarding in-state tuition and their own laws. I actually found out there's only like a handful of states, not even a handful, that actually allow immigrants to receive financial aid. And I think it's only Colorado, New Mexico, Washington State. But financial aid for immigrants as well, like that's not, immigrants don't receive financial aid because that's something that the government is giving them. And if you're undocumented, you don't receive that. As well as for DACA recipients, they don't qualify for financial aid. So I think like that particular case, Toll versus Moreno, kind of sets the stage of what is happening and what will happen as well in the 21st century, continuing with individuals and paying out-of-state tuition fees, because I don't know if many of you know, out-of-state tuition fees could be considered double, even triple the amount of money that in-state tuition is. And that's what an undocumented immigrant would be paying.
And if the DREAM Act were passed, would they then more likely have the opportunity for in-state tuition? Do you know?
So according to Senator Durbin, he states that the DREAM Act does not guarantee immigrants to receive like in-state tuition fees. He says that it's up to every single state to pass their own laws regarding in-state tuition fees. Like I said in my research, in the state of Florida, that in-state tuition waiver was passed in 2014. But there's like I said, there's very like criteria and requirements. Like in the state of Florida, when that waiver passed, individuals had to show high school transcript that they graduated a high school in the state of Florida. They had to show that they were in school for 3 consecutive years. And they also had to show that once they graduated high school, they had 24 months to apply to a higher education, to like a college or a university. So it like, that's why I wanted to just stick with the state of Florida and that aspect with my participants, because if I get into every single state, I'm going to write a book.
So Sophia, one of your main sort of arguments and contributions, I think, of this thesis is that children have been neglected, right, from the historiography of immigration, right? There's been much more of a focus on, on men and labor and sort of families. So first of all, why do you think that's been the case? Sort of why do you think historians have paid less attention to children? And what do you think, what does your research tell us that's new? How does this, for instance, build on the work of Lee and Olivas, who haven't sort of done the work that you're proposing? I was hoping you could talk about that a bit more.
Yeah, I also asked myself that question as well as I was writing this. I think you're thinking about children, there's a way you don't want to like approach a child, because think about it, like living during those time periods in the 20th century, like would you interview a child and ask them about their immigrating experience? I don't think that's ever happened. That would have been great if that did happen and there's something archived with that, but I don't think that there is. I don't know, like I just haven't found something on just children, immigrant children in themselves. And then what was your second question? You said, how does my work?
Yeah, so how does your work sort of, how does your work, what sort of nuances, what new complexity do we get from studying children? Why, what do you think it adds to the historiography to pay attention to the experiences of children, especially as you do in chapter 3?
Yeah. And I think you also asked about Lee's and Olivia's. Yeah, like I said, Lee does not focus her research on immigrant children. Like I said, she just focuses on different groups of immigrants throughout the centuries. Olivia's, as his book, he's a lawyer, so he's not going to focus on so much on the experiences of DACA recipients. I keep forgetting the question. Sorry.
It's okay. So how do you think that your research? Well, so what does your research tell us that complicates what Lee said, that complicates what Oliva says? Why is your research why is your research an important supplement to that? If you could, what do we get from studying children that we miss if we kind of ignore them?
No, I think it's important to learn about children and their experience. Like I said earlier, within this political debate, senators say, oh, well, they did something illegal or what they did was unlawful. And it's no, the children didn't know what they were doing. The parents made that decision for them, and the parents did it with good intentions. A lot of people say, oh, well, DACA recipients were dragged, or these immigrant children were dragged. No, children were just following their parents, you know? And I think for me, I think the very interesting thing, I realized this a couple months, doing these interviews and transcribing, like this will always be there. This can be archived for the future. And I feel that other historians can come back to my transcriptions and read it and learn from what these immigrants experienced. Because I was thinking, I was in special collections a couple months ago, scanning primary documents on slave interviews from the 1920s of former slaves. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm reading these slave interviews, and I'm wondering, like, if historians years later will come to my transcriptions and read what my, immigrants faced and dealt with as children and as undocumented immigrants, and just having that knowledge of their experiences can educate anybody.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. And yeah, I learned a lot reading them too. So thanks.
So I guess jumping off the point you just made, as well as something you said earlier about Ronald Takaki's book, where he weaves his family story into his sort of larger historical analysis. So I was really struck by chapter 3, and I really loved how it turned out, actually. But I will admit that when I got it, I was a bit surprised, because when we had been talking about chapter 3 for the entire year and a half you've been conceptualizing this, I expected a sort of, argument-driven piece of historical analysis that was using the oral histories as its evidence. So the way that somebody like Monica Martinez uses oral histories as evidence, but sort of intersperses them into, a larger piece of analytical writing. Whereas I feel like in chapter 3, you really, I assume it was a conscious decision to sort of put forward the voices of the interviews and to sort of recede yourself as the scholar a little bit, and to give your subjects the sort of center stage, if you will. You can tell me if that's wrong, but that's how it sort of looks.
No.
For my. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to give them the time for them to talk about their experience. And as we learned from your analysis class, like I don't ever want to silence somebody in history. That's why in chapter 3 you can see there's a lot of block quotes, and it was so hard for me to paraphrase certain things, because I don't want to edit something important that somebody felt was very important to say. So that's what I really wanted to give them the chance to talk about their experiences. And a lot of what they say also ties in with chapter 1 and chapter 2. And I try to make those connections within the chapter. Hopefully I was successful.
That's actually what I wanted to ask, and what I wanted to push you on is can you make those connections now? I mean, how do you see the stories that you tell in chapter 3 connecting to the arguments and the history that you advance in chapters 1 and 2?
Yeah. Well, one of the main connections that I make with chapter 3 and chapter 1 is that whole process of, you see these immigrants struggling with language, and that language obstacle, right? And people can argue that language can be the first obstacle, not obtaining a driver's license, correct? But I said these immigrant children, when they come to the United States, what's the first thing that they're going to do? They're going to go to school. They're going to go to ESOL classes. They're going to learn English, because they're encouraged to learn English. So yes, that language can be a barrier, but they will eventually overcome that and learn it. There's no laws saying that they can't learn English or they can't go to school. If Plyler versus Doe, like in chapter 1, if Plyler versus Doe didn't happen, then definitely going to school, getting that education and learning that language would become that first obstacle. It wouldn't be obtaining a driver's license. So that's where I was trying to make that connection as well, with Plyler versus Doe and Toll versus Moreno, with the higher education and tuition fees. And then in chapter 2, we see like this political usage of children, of the debate of what they can do for us. And I think you can see everybody's kind of Nick and Alejandro and Carl, when they received DACA, being a bit skeptical when they got DACA, because they were like, why did it take this long for these senators to give us this? And I think Alejandro was like, did President Obama pass this because, he was trying to get reelected? Is this his whole reason for passing DACA, because he waited 4 years? And as you see in chapter 2, anchorman Jorge Ramos from Univision, which is a Spanish news channel, confronted President Obama and asked him, he said, you promised immigration reform the first year that you were going to be in office. What happened? I want you to acknowledge that you screwed up on this. And he said, yeah, I screwed up. I was naive to think that Republicans would work with me on this, and I was facing an economic recession. So, it took him 4 years to finally do something. And then you see my participants in chapter 3 going, why did it take so long, and why did you pass this? And being skeptical about it and saying, well, I don't believe this until I have this document in my hand.
Great, thank you. Dr. McRyan, you have more questions?
Just one, just one. And it may not be fair. And if it's not, Dr. Prince and Dr. Irwin, you can say so, because I'm not an historian, I'm more a sociologist. And so I'm just going to press you a little bit about bias, because I sense a bias. I have the same one, you know that. So that's not a problem for me, but I'm just kind of curious how you might defend, let's see, as on page 27, you talked about the IIRIRA Act. It was Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act.
Yes.
And you said that it affected the lives of undocumented immigrants because they weren't able to live a normal life. And so there are very good arguments for what you say, but I'm going to ask you, what would you say to somebody who says, why should an adult who's not here legally receive these kinds of aids from my government?
Well, we need to think about that particular act. This was in 1996. And the way that I view this is, remember, if I'm speaking about children grow up. Children will become adults. And I think that's what many senators forget when, they're making these laws, or they do not want to pass a law like the DREAM Act. They say, we'll come back to this next year. We'll come back to this next year. And what happens next year? These kids are growing up, and then they become adults. So they need they need to become some way a part of society. They need that, that public health services, that, employment stuff. They need like assistance with certain things in society. And I think there is a bias. I mean, I'm an immigrant. I have to be biased in this topic. Unfortunately, I don't know how to not be biased.
All right, Sophia, I guess I have one last question too. So I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about the research process. I mean, so you research, you have lots of different types of sources. You have legislative debates, you have immigration law, court decisions, obviously the ethnographies, newspapers. Can you talk a little bit about sort of both what you found valuable about these types of sources, but also what some of their limits are? And this might help you kind of, respond to some of the other questions too. I mean, this is kind of building off what we've talked about, but what do you see as the most valuable source that you used? Why was it valuable? What are the limitations of these sources? So.
Sure. I feel that the most valuable source that I was able to get was definitely that 2007 political debate on the DREAM Act on the Senate floor. That was like a 20-minute debate, and that I was able to get it from ProQuest congressional records, and it was great to have that in my hands and to see all of that was actually transcribed. I think one of the things that I would have liked to see, and we're in the 21st century, would have been videos. of this debate for me to actually view these senators debating it, and there was no videos on it, which was very, very upsetting. But also like if I'm doing this type of research, you're thinking 21st century, I can easily go on YouTube and find, President Barack Obama giving his speech of, when DACA was announced. But what was interesting about that was when I went on YouTube, I did see the speech, and then I went to another online source to find the transcribed speech, and YouTube cut off the part where a reporter shouted out, you prefer foreigners over American workers. And that was in the transcribed part of that speech, but it wasn't in the YouTube video. So, certain things like that I found fascinating as I'm doing, the research, which is great. Oh, you found a video, but the video kind of lied and didn't show you the whole speech of what actually happened. I think like, for me, I think I had the most fun just going through the congressional records. I've never done that before. I really have to thank Susan Silver, one of our librarians, who really directed me towards that. Like the DREAM Act in 2001 is called S1291. And I kept putting that S1291 in the ProQuest congressional records, and it wouldn't come up. And I'm like, what is going on? Why can't I find it? Apparently, I needed to take off the S and put 1291, and it would pop up. But it took me forever to figure that out. Right. So, that's just the whole research process.
Exactly. Yeah. Could you talk just a little bit about the interview process too? I mean, the chapter 3 and sort of again, what do you see as the sort of the most, what do we get out of these sort of personal stories? And then, maybe what are the limitations of only having 4 sources for four individuals, right? Obviously, four interviews takes a very long time, so I'm not minimizing it. But, if you were able to have, 50 people, do you think it would have told a different story? Reflecting on that a little bit more, that process.
Sure. With the interviews, many people don't know that these individuals, I actually interviewed them back in 2018 for my undergrad thesis. So it was nice to have them back again. And for this particular, research, back then our research was a little different. It was on DACA and identity formation. And I was like, no, I want to know a little bit more about, what you experienced as a child. And those questions I didn't get to ask the first time. So it was nice asking them these questions. Now, I know I had Nick, Carl, Alejandro, so 3, and then myself. I know for a dissertation, people typically do about 10, maybe 20 interviews. I felt that it wasn't necessary to do that many interviews, because when interviewing, you get to learn about your participant and their experiences. And when you're transcribing takes about triple the amount of time that the interview takes, because transcribing, you pause and you go back, you pause and you go back, and you want to make sure that you're getting every single word correctly of what they're saying. And doing that whole transcribing process made me have their stories engraved in my mind. So if anybody wants to know something about Nick or something about Carl or something about Alejandro, it's in my mind, because I don't have 10, 20 other people that I interviewed. It's just those 3. And I can really talk about their experiences. And I felt that 3 was a perfect number, and then adding myself. But like I said, I really wanted to showcase them, because they're not here. They can't tell you about their experience, where anybody can come up to me and say, can you tell me about your own experience? And I'm more than happy to share. I'm an open book. But yeah, I really wanted to give them that opportunity.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
So I actually want to go back to Dr. McBrien's question about bias a little bit, and maybe push you a little further on that. Because yes, this is a totally legitimate question for historians to ask. It's not a problem. So, clearly you do have a perspective on these issues, and I, like Dr. McBrien, tend to agree with your perspective on these issues. But one of the things that a historian has to do is write fairly about people with whom you fundamentally disagree. And, my research is largely on the 19th century, but I've written an awful lot about just terrible white supremacists and just awful human beings who I hate with every fiber of my being. But yet my job as a historian is to explain their perspective and their worldview in a way that is fair and as I won't say objective because there's no such thing, but as fair to them as I possibly can be in spite of my own agenda. So could you speak to your experience with that in writing about, perhaps some of the Republican members of Congress whose views were not aligned with your own? Do you think you achieved that? Do you think you fairly articulated their perspectives? Was that a challenge? Could you speak about that maybe a little bit?
Sure. It's so funny you say that. I'm remembering back when I was doing the research on the congressional records, and especially that 2007 debate on the DREAM Act, and reading the Republicans' views and opinions about what they thought of, well, what they did was illegal and they're criminals and that's what you're trying to do. And I was getting so angry that I just would shut off my computer. I was like, I don't want to read this. I don't want to read this. But then I said, no, I can't do that. I need to tell their side and I need to showcase what they're saying and try to understand why they're saying that. So it was difficult because obviously, I'm an immigrant and I felt that within that debate, they don't really like know, these immigrants. They never try to get to know immigrants, where I feel like some of the Democrat senators were saying, well, why don't you, meet somebody? Why don't you, get to learn from their experience? And some of the Republican senators, didn't want to. So it was hard for me, but I felt that I was saying, no, I need to learn and understand what they're saying and still showcase what they're saying and show their viewpoints and just how I'm giving the Democrats their side, I need to do the same thing for the Republicans. So it was, at first it was hard because I was getting angry by what I was reading, but then I was like, no, I need to get over this and do what I need to do as a historian.
Another round of questions from the committee? It's totally fine if there are more questions. We haven't been here that long.
I'm good.
I have one more softball if you wanna take that. I remember when we first started talking about this thesis, and I said to you, I'm paraphrasing, you shouldn't write an MA thesis. It's a terrible idea. It's going to be really hard, and you just shouldn't do it. And you said to me quite eloquently, I need to do this. I need to write this history. You basically said, I'm going to do this with you or without you. Do you want to help? And I said I would help. Can you speak to that a little bit, just for, why? Why does this matter? Why do you want to tell this story? Who is this for? Why does this history matter? Why are you so passionate about it?
Sure. It's funny. I was actually in Dr. Benedusi's class, and Arminda actually reminded me about this, that I've actually been doing this work since 2017, since Jeff Sessions rescinded Daca, because that was the day that I got angry and I said, you don't know people like me. There's so many people out there that are just like me, that are not criminals, like you're saying, and that are actually wanting to contribute to this country and are good, working members. And I felt that I needed to write this history because I wanted to educate. I felt that, especially in chapter 2, I was trying to simplify everything that was going on in the congressional records and the debates, because I don't want somebody that has their master's or their PhD, to read this. I want everybody, anybody. I don't care if you have a degree or not, just to be able to read this in simplified terms and to be able to understand what is going on in this country and to understand these individuals and their experiences and see that, they're just normal people. They're just like you, even though they're not citizens. And that's what I wanted to do. And yeah, you put it in the right terms. I said, I'm going to write this. And it's going to happen. And I hope, one day that I can take this and maybe one day it'll become a book. And, like my undergrad thesis, apparently I didn't think we would publish it as an academic journal article, and we did it. So, and that's exactly what I wanted to do with that one as well. I wanted to, put that out there so that anybody can read it and anybody can understand what these senators are saying and these laws and how it's affecting these immigrants.
Thank you. Committee, we good? Any questions from the audience? Don't be shy.
Raise your hand. Oh, Samla.
Samla has a question, yeah.
Hey there, sorry, I had to chime in from my phone. My internet died 2 minutes into your talk. So I had a question about your interview choices and gender disparity. So I noticed that the 3 people that you interviewed were male, and I know obviously you're a girl, so you could give that female perspective, but do you feel like you missed out on anything from not getting another girl child perspective?
Yeah, I think I heard your question right. You kind of froze, but I think I got what you said. No, I thought about that too. I said, wow, I have 3 males and I'm the only female. Yeah, I would have wished to have interviewed like one more female and to hear if maybe her experience would have been a little bit different than the males. But kind of comparing myself to the males, our experiences were still similar regardless, of gender. Yeah, I would have wanted to do maybe one more interview with a female, but it just wasn't possible. And unfortunately, time was ticking. I had to quickly, get my participants and get everybody on board to interview. So with who I had to work with. And like I said, I was lucky enough that I interviewed them back in 2018 and they were okay with being interviewed again. So thank you, Tamala.
And at that time period, you did have another female. So,
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in 2018. But she did not want to be interviewed for this one. So I had to respect that. Do we have another hand up?
Yeah, it's Dr. Perry, Scott.
Yes. Oh. Hi. Yes. Can I just ask to follow up a bit on what Dr. Prince and Dr. McBrien were asking? The concept of amnesty in Senator Imhoff's speech. Of course, amnesty is a wonderful principle from ancient Greek history, and it was used in political encounters between the Greek city-states. But I remember when I was a teenager in South Texas, President Reagan signed the amnesty bill that made 3 million people citizens, basically. So it was a path to citizenship established in South Texas. Now, Texas has always been a bit different, I think, when you look at immigration history in general. But I remember at the time, it was a Republican and Democrat initiative. There wasn't a political split in the 1980s on this principle of amnesty. And it strikes me that the politically charged aspect of amnesty as a word is something pretty new. And I just wonder if that's something that, because as you mentioned, you came across illegal, and illegal has the same kind of thing. It's amnesty for a perceived breaking of law.
Yes.
So again, I think that part of what offended you so much is it's the children are not the lawbreakers. Of course, that's obviously the case. But I think when people hear the word amnesty, they look at it as legitimating breaking the law. Mm-hmm. And it's an interesting word because it usually means that you've done something wrong in order to have amnesty. So I totally agree. There's obviously a horrific racism and everything else behind it. The political charge, it strikes me, is based on not just power politics, but this perception of law and what law means in how you reward a law breaking potentially. So again, we've talked about it before, Sophia, because I've always been so intrigued by that. And having had that experience as a teenager myself, I remembered thinking, like, why were my friends so supportive of this? And, you know, all of my friends were immigrants or you know, Latino Americans, and they saw it as a validation of themselves. And it was bipartisan. And so I think Republicans probably reaped political rewards for amnesty in the 80s. But in 2007, they wouldn't. And that's just interesting, I think, from that perspective.
No, you bring up a good point and also a good question, because this actually happened in Works in Progress. People wanted me to talk a little bit more about amnesty. And I had to clarify it a bit more in Chapter 2 of the DREAM Act, whether it's an amnesty bill or not. And, you know, when Republicans hear amnesty, they're like, we want nothing to do with this. You know, we do not want amnesty, you know, but in the 2007 debate, the Democrats are arguing that the DREAM Act is not an amnesty bill. Why? Because these immigrant children would have to say, you know, what I did was unlawful. And how can they say what I did was unlawful if they didn't make the choice? Their parents made the choice. So that's where, you know, Democrats are saying this is not an amnesty bill, because they're not going to say what I did was wrong. Like, I didn't make that choice to immigrate. My parents made the choice. So there's also that debate as well of, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. That debate of whether the DREAM Act is an amnesty bill or not. And for many, they say this is not an amnesty bill, because the children would have to say, you know, what I did was unlawful, and many will not say that. Do we have other hands up?
Yeah, Arminda.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Going on what Dr. Irwin had asked you about the difference in interviewing and focusing on children and what that adds to this, I wonder if you considered the fact that, and I guess my question is that as adults we're guarded with our responses and our answers. You know, we're very careful sometimes about how we respond to things. And do you feel like interviewing someone about what they felt like as a child, they're more open to give you the absolute truth, and that, you know, by interviewing a child's perspective, even as adults, you can give more of how you truly felt, and instead of more of a guarded response?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Days before I interviewed every single person, I sent them a text and I said, hey, I'm actually going to ask you about, you know, your experience in your home country and what you remember and some memories and the immigrating experience, because think about it, it takes a lot of thought process. I'm not asking them what happened 2 years ago. I'm asking them what happened 20 years ago. That's a lot of thought process. So I was trying to let them know a couple of days in advance, start thinking about, you know, what you experience and maybe some of your thoughts and emotions. And I feel that, no, I don't think like any of them were guarded with their answers. I think the one that really spoke his emotions and said what he wanted to say and didn't care about how he said it was Nick. And Nick in his interview, he cusses a lot, but he does it because, look, he could be mad, he could be sad, and he has every right to feel those emotions of what he went through. And I still transcribed it because I'm not going to silence him in history. And if he cusses, it is what it is. And I think like a couple people who read my undergrad thesis, they love Nick. And I'm like, really? But I say that because I know Nick on such a personal level. I know all three of them on a personal level, but I'm like, really? And I'm like, why is that? And they say, well, because Nick has no filter.
You can't do it.
And he says
Talking
things
about
like how they're
thesis.
supposed to be. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Somebody not
It's been
invited.
great. Like I'm not at work right now. I asked him to. My boss that I want to leave for this meeting. So he was like, no, you have to be there. So I'm working and listening at the same time.
Taco.
Let's see. All right, Sophia.
I am very sorry. Sorry, I'm listening to this at work. I'm so sorry.
That's okay, Saka.
That's a good friend who's listening to this at work.
All right, any more questions from the audience? Alyssa Roy. You may be muted still.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. I apologize. For whatever reason, I can't get any sound to work on my computer, so I see you through my computer, but I'm speaking on my phone. So there are two of me on this call. But Sophia, what I wanted to ask you is, was there a time where, did you know that you were going into this and you were going to include your own experience and your own story, or did you struggle with whether or not to include that? And could you kind of walk me through the process of maybe what some of those struggles were, if you did have them, what your thoughts were on the pros and cons of including your story?
Yeah, no, definitely. When talking about my own experience, I struggled, and I think it was the part where I'm talking about being a child and, you know, coming into this country and assimilating. And that was hard for me as a child, assimilating. And I talk about how I never share this with anybody, only like a couple people know this, is I just struggled with English for many years. I was below average for 3 years. My reading comprehension was horrible. I went to summer school for 6 years. I was held back. So when I graduated high school, I was 19. And, you know, I talk about those struggles as a child, not being able to, you know, assimilate. And you know, it happens with children. Some children are able, like I said it perfectly in the thesis. I said children will sink or they'll swim. And a couple will sink and then they'll start swimming. And for me, I was like, I sank for 3 years because I couldn't understand English. Like I said, I just had a hard time. It was also difficult because nobody at home spoke English and nobody could really help me with my homework. And, you know, it is what it is. You know, my parents had to work full time. My brother was also trying to figure it out for himself. And that was a big struggle for me and writing that down. And I think not just my experience, but all three of them, when I transcribed and I was trying to put this together, I cried for 3 weeks straight. It was an emotional, chapter 3 was emotional. I thought chapter 2 was going to be hard because trying to understand the whole legal and political talk. And I was like, oh, this is going to be hard. This is the hardest chapter. And I'm thinking chapter 3, you know, we're going to do interviews. It'll be great. And no, I was an emotional wreck for 3 weeks with chapter 3 about my experience and, you know, my participants' experience. You know, like in the PowerPoint, I talk about Carl and what, you know, his parents went through. And as he's telling me this during the interview, I'm stressing out for him. But I'm like, this happened 20 years ago. But you're freaking out because you're like, oh my God, like what it's like to be his parents and in their shoes. I remember I cried when Nick told me about, like, you know, the day he immigrated and, you know, getting in the car and getting out of the car to say bye to his grandmother and going back in the car and getting out of the car again. Is like he did it 2 or 3 times. And he said, you know, I didn't think that was going to be the last time I saw my grandmother. That was hard for me because as well, I experienced the same thing. Like, I didn't think that was going to be the last time I would ever see my grandmother again, because as immigrants, we can leave the country, but we're not allowed back into the United States. So, you know, we don't get to see our family members. You know, we can't do that. So I understood his pain through that interview, and I, you know, made a connection with mine, and I sobbed like a baby right after. So yeah, that was hard with chapter 3. But like I said, I had to, you know, pull through and tell their experiences, and as well, you know, talk about mine, as much as like I don't talk about me struggling with, you know, English. I never did, but I was like, no, I need to put this out there and let people know that this was hard. I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you so much. And I'd just like to touch on that a bit further. I thought, as I was reading chapter 3, that you struck a really beautiful balance with, you know, just sharing your story and sharing the story of the other interviews. I think it was really great that your story didn't necessarily overpower their voices. It's not easy to do that. Touching on the bias that was brought up, you know, to include your own story alongside those of others. I thought that was done very well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, like I said, I really wanted to give them the opportunity to talk and really give their experiences. And like I said, I like, as you can see in chapter 3, it's like, I think it's like Nick, Alejandro, Carl, and I talk last. And I always put myself last. Like it just put myself last. It's fine, because like I said, anybody can talk to me and ask me about my experience, and I will share it. I don't mind. But like I said, with the administration that we had last time was not pro DACA. I had to go through the IRB the second time. This is my second time through IRB, but great that this research was exempted from IRB approval. But I was still trying to take those precautions of, you know, trying to maintain everybody's identity private. So.
Great. Any more questions? Sophia, your camera's off, by the way. I don't know if that's intentional.
No, it isn't.
Oh, you're off on my screen. Everybody else has a face except you. It's sort of.
No, my camera's on.
Okay, it's my. Any other questions? All right, so the committee will hop off this call. The rest of you can hang out and talk. Committee, we will join the other team's meeting that I set up yesterday. We'll confer, and then we will come back with results and any revisions that we're going to ask you to do. Sue, are you going to come with us, or are you going to stay? Will this meeting shut down if you leave? It might.
I don't know. So how about I stay here, and then you'll just tell me what to do with the paperwork after your meeting, and then that way you guys don't, you can be by yourselves.
Okay, perfect. Sounds
Does that
good.
sound good?
Yep.
Okay.
We'll get back soon then.
Okay. If everybody wants to chill with me for I don't know how long. Or raise your hand if you have another question or a comment. I think we still have quite a couple people left. Oh, okay. Give me a second. Who raised their hand? I'm gonna let Ashley speak, because Ashley, I haven't heard from you. Hi.
I just wanted to congratulate you. I know how hard you've been working on this, and I'm very, very proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That means a lot.
I'm very proud of you. I know how much you've put into this, and I know your personal struggle with putting your story into it. We talked about it last time, and I just wanted to let you know I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for coming, by the way.
You're welcome.
Alyssa.
I just had another comment for you. I know when I had got together the other day, you had told me about the story where you're on the plane coming over and you see the sun on one side and, you know, the night on the other. And there was something even more magical about seeing it in writing. It was just so beautiful. I have to say it was one of my favorite parts of the of the entire work, and I just really loved it. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. No, I'm actually, like, I can talk about this because I think a couple people are going to be like, what is she talking about? Because you read chapter 3, but a lot of people haven't. So what Alyssa's talking about is I'm describing the day that I was immigrating. And I'm on the airplane from leaving Buenos Aires and coming to Miami. And I just remember this picture so vivid in my mind. On the right side of the plane, it was nighttime. It was all dark and the moon was out. And on the left side of the plane, it was daylight. The sun was coming up. And as an adult now, I view it like so symbolically, like the sun rising. That was our new chapter in the United States. And the nighttime and the moon, that was like our chapter in Argentina closing. So I view that, and I was like, that picture's just so vivid in my mind. And it's like one of the most beautiful things that I still remember from this day of being 6 years old on that plane. But as an adult, I was like, wow, this is so symbolic. I never thought of it as the sun rising in our new chapter in the US, and nighttime, the moon, and, our closing our chapter of Argentina. So thank you, Alyssa. I'm glad you enjoyed that. Victoria.
Hi, I just want to make a comment. And so I'm not a historian or a sociologist or any of those things. I work in the field of science. And I just are those your parents in the little other screen?
Tell you, Mom and
Hi,
Dad.
Adriana. So I just kind of want to let everybody know how I first met Sophia and how she inspired me to just become more educated on DACA students, or just DACA in general and the whole immigration policy. And I work for the USF Sarasota Manatee campus, but out at the Moat teaching labs. So her parents they would come here at night and I'd be working late, and they would clean our labs. They would do all the vacuuming and everything. And then at one point they got too busy. So then Sophia started coming to do it. And that's actually how I first met her. I didn't even know that she was one of our students. And then she shared her story with, I don't know if any of you know Edie Banner, and we were just shocked and amazed. And I want to say, I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that until I had met her, I didn't really care or think much of it, because I kind of lived in my own bubble, and I didn't realize that we had so many students that were in that same situation. And so to just see her, graduate, I saw her presentation for her undergrad that she did that was very impressive. And I just want to say that it's been such an honor to watch her just flourish and grow and become such a scholar. And I just could not be more proud of you, Sophia, and congratulations to your parents, because they've done such a good job like raising you and giving you such a hard work ethic, and it's just very admirable. So I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so glad you invited me to watch this today.
No, thank you. I when I got your email, I was like, who's Victoria? And then I was like, oh wait, I know Victoria. So you and I met a long time ago. You're right, when Mom and Dad were cleaning the labs at Moat Marine, and then I started taking over. I think I did it for a year, that I did all the cleaning, and then you saw my undergrad thesis at the symposium, and I can't believe like I'm so honored that like inspired you to join Undocumented, and I'm so happy, and I'm so happy that you came. Thank you so much for coming. And I hope that we can do our like a separate meeting, because I know you wanted to meet with me, and we can talk a little bit more amongst ourselves. So
yes, and just whenever you get free time, don't worry about it. I know you got your hands full right now.
Okay, but no, thank you so much for coming and for listening in, and I can't wait to speak with you. Let's see, we have Dr. Cohen.
Hi. For some reason, I have a view that I'm only seeing you at the moment and not everyone. I'm not used to Microsoft Teams. Anyway, thank you so much for inviting me, Sophia. I'm Professor Katie Benton Cohen at Georgetown, and have corresponded and Zoomed with Sophia this last year. And no one has ever done something like reach out to me and invite me to something like this outside of my own university. And just hearing that story was so incredibly moving, and you were so you had so much self-possession during your defense, and it was really a pleasure to join you. So thank you so much for the invitation, and I know that we'll stay in touch, and I have some thoughts and ideas that we can share in the future. I also had a nice exchange with Sarah McNamara about you, so I feel like I'm making some nice connections, and I want to say in particular congratulations to your family. I hope you have a big, safe celebration. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm so happy that you came. Thank you. And yeah, and no, definitely we will be in touch, and we'll talk more about, my research as
Next.
well. Yes, please. So please, we'll be in contact. We'll email, we'll Zoom. But I'm very happy that you came.
Thank you. I am as well.
I think Arminda.
I just want to echo everybody's comments about how proud I am of you. I have watched you struggle and work hard on these projects, undergrad and grad, and you have done an amazing job. And because I know the family, and I know how close you all are, and yeah, I'm just so proud of you, and I think that you've done a tremendous job.
Thank you. And you and I have been through this since 2016 in Dr. Perry's Theories and Methods when you were pregnant with Lincoln. And Lincoln is now 4, and I can't believe he's 4, and I can't believe it's been 4 years. We've been great friends.
Yep, and extended family at that too.
Yes, yeah, and I still remember the day we were at the USF Cafe, and I said, I think we should be applying to MA programs. So I got to.
Yeah, I blame you for this. I totally blame you for this. All this gray that you have caused me, it's all your fault.
Oh, but look, we're about to finish.
I know.
A month.
Well, so the committee may have something to say about that.
Oh no.
We are all back. We have deliberated and debated and concluded after much filibustering that you certainly passed your MA thesis. Congratulations.
Yay, thank you.
We do have a couple things that we'd like you to take care of for next week. I'll outline them now. If you want to talk in more detail later, that's fine. First of all, this is something you mentioned, but some serious line editing and cleaning and grammar checks and all of that is in order before the final submission next week.
Yes.
We do think that a bibliography is necessary, so we do actually want you to do that and create the bibliography for the submitted version. And then perhaps the biggest revision is sort of going back to the question that I asked you about other historiography. You really talk an awful lot about Olivas and Erica Lee. You mentioned Roger Daniels, but we think maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs in the introduction where you talk about some of the other scholarship that affected your thinking. We know that you've read a lot. We know that there's probably, you can bring up Takaki, you can bring up Monica Martinez. There are other scholars who influenced your thinking, perhaps people who used oral history in interesting ways. So we want you to add 2 or 3 sort of sizable historiography paragraphs somewhere in the introduction to sort of round out that discussion, because it's fine that clearly Lee and Olivas are your sort of go-to scholars, and that's fine.
Okay.
But you're in a larger scholarly
more and how they influenced and were models to my research. Okay, I can do that.
A few paragraphs, and that was it. So.
Okay.
If you could do that by Friday, we will get the paperwork signed, and you are good to go.
Yay!
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's been almost an entirely pleasure working with you.
What did you say?
I said it's been almost entirely a pleasure.
Okay, I'm getting emails and stuff, but I think everybody's good. Everybody has said. I see one hand up. I don't know.
Sorry.
Oh, Dr. Cohens, I think she forgot to put it down, but nobody has anything else to say.
Congratulations.
So you'll enjoy your weekend writing your bibliography.
Right, my bibliography. I was about to take a nap after this.
Take a nap.
Take a nap.
Take a nap.
You can take a nap.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for coming and showing support. I really appreciate it. We had like 25 people.
Yeah.
Congrats,
Wow.
Sophia.
Thank you. Thank you.
And you did a really good job today in the defense. You absolutely killed it.
Thank you. Thank you. I was nervous about where to look.
Nope. All good. Except when you disappeared from my screen, but that wasn't your fault.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. I think people are slowly leaving. I don't think anybody has any.
Emily, congratulations.
Congratulations, Sophia.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Irwin.
So Sue, are you you'll send the DocuSign to the committee? And we'll do that. And then is that all that needs to happen?